Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you the round 8 game from Zadar. And this game is important for me because it highlighted a hole in my opening repertoire. And the conceptual mistake which I kept on making up until this game, I'm not going to make it anymore. Just let me get into the game. But I'm playing Tihan Ivekovic, whom I've played twice before. We drew both games. I was white in both games. And they were sort of boring. The first one was an exchange French, and the second one was a Jobava London system, where I wanted to complicate things, but she didn't want to, so the game quickly became very equal and drawn. In this game, we transposed from a Semi-Slav into an Open Catalan. Let me show you how. Now, this opening is very important for my repertoire and for any Semi-Slav player. When white plays g3 on move 4, it's important whether the c3 knight was developed or the f3 knight was developed. Usually, developing the c3 knight allows an easier capture on c4. I don't want to get into that too much, but I took on c4 anyway, and this is one of the main lines of the opening. Now, here, usually white continues bishop to g2, and this I was prepared for. There's a big difference with this position compared to the Open Catalan. The difference is that the pawn is still on e7. Now this means that black has an extra tempo compared to the Open Catalan. So that means, firstly, this bishop cannot come into b4, pinning the c3 knight, defending the b5 pawn if the pawn is defended. But more importantly, black has enough time to do other things now that the pawn is kept on e7. So black can comfortably play b5, and after castles continue bishop to b7. And obviously, having a bishop on b7 instead of a pawn on e6 is a huge improvement. Okay, another line black could go for, which is the main line, is pawn to g6, and in this variation, black cannot simply go for the pawn on c4, because after, for example, castles, which is the main move, and bishop to g7, if knight e5 is played, then there's this idea of knight g4, which more than equalizes for black, again provided by the fact that the pawn was kept on e7. And this means if the c4 pawn is captured, then the d4 pawn is captured, and obviously black is going to be a clean pawn up. And if the knights are traded off, then the e2 pawn is pinned to the queen, and the c4 pawn is kept on the board. More importantly, after b5, there's no double attack on c6 because there's no knight on f3. But in this position, she played a move that I've never seen before. And even though I've never seen it before, I had to be prepared for it, and I wasn't. So she played knight c3, which is not a good move. Knight c3, because e6 hasn't been played, doesn't make too much sense. And there are a couple of ways to play this position now. I misplayed it conceptually. So I should have continued either g6 or b5, going into the same position I'd shown you a few minutes earlier, and basically kept the advantages of not having played pawn to e6. Instead of that, I allowed her to justify the move knight c3 by playing pawn to e6. And now we are in the main line Open Catalan. Now we have transposed. Now I have a lot of experience in this line, or at least I thought I did. And Milan plays the Catalan, so we played this several times. And I was prepared for this. I thought I would feel more comfortable in the main lines. Okay, so she continued knight e5 instead of bishop to g2. Bishop g2 is the main move, but still this is okay. Okay, now I can go knight bd7, or I can go b5. I went b5, she played bishop to g2. And now again, there are two ways to play this position, three ways actually. I could go queen b6, knight d5, defending by brute force, or I can go a6, which is in my opinion, the best move. Now, if the pawn is taken, if knight c6 is played, then I go queen b6, and this is a great position for black, because if knight takes knight, then rook takes, and I have a 3-2 pawn majority. I gave the pawn back, but that doesn't mean much, because this is going to be very scary to deal with, and also I can trade off the bishops or force the pawn to e4, which would weaken d4. And after something like bishop to e7, castles, rook d8, this pawn would be under a ton of pressure. Okay, but she didn't take on c6. She played pawn to a4. And now I thought for 20 minutes. Not that I didn't know that bishop b7 was good, which is the normal move, but I thought b4 was better, which is a huge mistake. And I'll show you how quickly black can get into trouble if he deviates from usual plans. Now, you might think that bishop b7 doesn't work tactically if you are unfamiliar with these positions. It does work because in the end I have queen a5 check. Okay, I'll show you because it may seem complicated. So the problem seemingly with bishop b7 is a b5, rook a8, bishop a8, and then knight takes pawn because the bishop is hanging. So this, of course, if I cannot take the knight, would be much, much better for white. But I can't take because after bishop takes, I have queen a5. The king hasn't been castled yet. So I can play bishop to b7 and it's sound, and after castles there is a threat, of course, of taking because now there's no queen a5 check, but I can continue queen c8, I can continue knight d5, I can even play bishop to e7 and just continue developing, or I can play queen b6. So this would have been a normal position. I would have played knight d5 and now e4, knight c3, bc3, knight d7, and a normal open Catalan. This I've analyzed and played. But during the game, I couldn't find a reason why b4 would be a bad move. It is a bad move, and it's pretty clear why, but I completely misjudged the position. And I was just much worse after the opening. So I played b4, and this is a forcing move, forces the knight to either b1 or to e4. Knight a2 doesn't make too much sense. So what I was calculating and expecting was knight e4, and after knight e4, bishop e4, I was going to play a5, giving up my c4 pawn and then playing bishop to b7. In my mind, this seemed like a good idea. It's not a good idea, just bishop f4, and after knight d7, obviously white is better. I don't have anything in this position. Instead, she played knight b1, which is not as good, and I thought it was almost impossible strategically for a very simple reason that either e3 has to be played and the bishop has to be blocked in order to play knight to d2, or if knight to d2 is played, queen takes pawn, or if b3 is played after knight takes c4 and bishop to b2, the dark squared bishop is simply not good on the diagonal. So I thought knight b1 is a bad move. It's not a bad move. Again, I misjudged the position completely. I played a5, and in this position she castled, and I should have played bishop a6, which I did consider briefly, but I didn't want to give up the exchange just yet. So I played bishop to b7, which is far inferior. After bishop a6, I'm actually slightly better if she takes the exchange, and this exchange sack in the Open Catalan you should never be afraid of, because giving up this bishop for the a8 rook is almost never good for white. So for example, bishop a6 defending the pawn. Knight takes, bishop takes here. I think the best move would be to simply retreat the bishop. But if the rook is taken, then black has a clear advantage. A passed pawn on the c-file protected, huge pressure on the white king. I could even continue like a maniac with h5, h4, and white is yet to develop her pieces, so this would have been better for black. Instead I went bishop to b7, and now it's clear that white is the one who won the opening battle, and after the pawn falls, I go bishop e7. She played b3, which again isn't such a good move. There was a better way to play, which I didn't see. Luckily, she didn't see it either. She could just play queen to d3 instead of b3, and then continue normally with knight to d2. So for example, knight d5, knight bd2, and knight to d7, knight b3. There's a ton of pressure on a5, and after something like bishop a6, she can simply retreat the queen. I would be forced to take, and after takes, play something like queen c7. And this is, the engine gives it as +3, which is kind of hard to materialize for humans, but nonetheless, white is better. White is simply better. So queen d3 would have been better than b3. She played b3. I castled, bishop to b2, queen to c7. I want to play c5, but I want my b7 bishop to be defended. Knight bd2, c5. Okay. And now she exchanged the bishops to make sure I cannot take on c5 with the queen. And then she took on c5. And I looked at this and I thought, okay, my a5 pawn is weak, her knights are wonderful pieces, f6 is weak, I may get mated, but I couldn't see a way for her to mate me. So I just thought, okay, I'm holding everything. Worst case, I can play bishop d8, queen c7, defending a5. I'm going to play knight bd7, knight b6 to trade off the c4 knight, and with just one knight attacking a5, I should be okay. So I took on c5. She took on f6, gf6, and then queen c2, knight d7, knight e4. Okay, I cannot give up this bishop, because if f6 becomes weak, I am going to get mated. So bishop e7, rook a d1. And here I thought for a long time. I cannot really play a normal move like rook d8 because knight d6 is hanging. And I already have to be very careful. Then again, if I can get my knight into c3, I will have achieved something. So I played knight b6, which in my mind was the only move, and afterwards in the analysis I concluded that it actually is the easiest move for humans to play. So if she trades on d6, that's okay, I can play queen a7 and then get to play knight d5, knight c3, challenging the d-file. But she exchanged, which is natural, and then played knight d2, getting the other knight into c4. Now, probably white is still slightly better, because I have a weakness on a5 and she doesn't have a weakness. I can easily target, especially with my minor piece. But I get to trade off the major pieces. So knight c4, queen a7, takes, rook d1. And here I played queen c7. And after rook d8, queen d8, we actually agreed to a draw. Which, if I had the white pieces, I never would have accepted the draw. I offered the draw after queen c7 and she accepted. I don't think we even traded rooks. But what is she risking? I mean, I can understand that winning this position isn't easy. But one thing that surely should come to mind if you're playing the white pieces here is that black has no way to make progress. There's simply no way to make progress in this position for black. I have no idea what to do. Somehow, I would have to infiltrate on c3 with my queen. I don't see that happening because white simply plays queen to d2 here. If I trade queens, then I lose the endgame, and there's no doubt about that. My kingside pawn structure is worse than hers. My minor piece is much worse than hers. There's no way in the world I'm removing this knight from c4, obviously just with the dark squared bishop. And all she has to do is get the king to b5. That's not easy. But if my king starts blocking the queen side, it would mean that I would have to get my king either to c5 or to a6. Then her king has a lot of time to get into h6. And I mean, if I trade queens, I should lose. So I should play queen c7 if this happens, and then she simply continues king f1 and e3 and starts getting into my position. Again, I don't see a way for black to make progress. I tried making moves when I was analyzing this endgame, but I just couldn't see anything useful. Probably queen d1 to prevent queen d7, and again, I'm not saying it's easy to win this for white, but I don't see any risk. So if I had the white pieces, I would have played on, definitely. She accepted the draw, which I was obviously happy to get. I knew I was worse out of the opening. I knew I had a worse endgame, and I basically got away with it. A stronger player would have beaten me 10 times, and easily. So yeah, this was the round 8 game. I'm not happy with how I played. Point-wise, it's an okay result because I drew a high-rated player, but this is a game I have to learn from a lot. And I have, since the game, I analyzed these Catalan transposition invitations for a long time, and I found a lot of improvements in the opening ideas. So the next time I face this, I will be prepared. Okay, if you play d4 or if you play the Semi-Slav, you should know these ideas and you should be aware of the transpositions that could occur. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much for watching. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.